What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome to the Week 10 UFL Breakdown. It's the regular season finale, and I am here yet again with Millionaire Maker winner and one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I am once again sick on a Thursday. I feel like every week we've done the show. Actually, usually I've just been sleep deprived. I'm actually well rested. I've slept 8 hours each of the past 2 nights, but I have come down with something. I was on the plane yesterday, and my sinuses were bothering me, and I felt like my eardrums might just like explode yesterday. And so it's been a little bit rough, but feeling better today. Better now than I was this morning. Looking forward to. Not really looking forward to this slate. Yeah, we've discussed this multiple times. How I don't love these slates where there's like you don't even know the team's motivations. You love them a lot more than I do. So and you crushed it last week with your analysis of that slate. So I am glad to have your thoughts here. But yeah, we'll do our best here.
Yeah, glad to hear it. I actually also am a little sick. I thought last night that I was going to wake up this morning and just feel terrible, but I actually feel a little bit better. So I guess we're both slightly under the weather, but I can't think of a better cure than some Week 10
That's right.
UFL DFS action. If you are getting some action down in Week 10, betting any player props, playing any DFS, I think you're going to want to subscribe to either our UFL package or our all-in package over at fantasypoints.com. Now, all-in includes UFL, college football, NFL, and the Fantasy Points data suite. But here's what you get in just our UFL product. You get projections for every player in every game, main slate DFS ownership projections, a weekly written breakdown of the DFS slate. That's actually free this week. So even if you're not a subscriber, you can go check that out over on fantasypoints.com. You also get access to our paywall Discord, where I provide notes on coach speak, insider info, breakdowns of any single game showdown or Sunday only DFS slates. You also get our official picks for player props. So far this year, we've gone 39 and 36 for plus 2.8 units or a plus 12% ROI. Neil, let's get into these games. First game of the week here on Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's the St. Louis Battlehawks at the DC Defenders. St. Louis favored by 1.5. DC opened as a favorite, slowly got bet into St. Louis's favor as DC sort of announced they were resting starters. No Jordan Ta'amu this week. It will be Mike DeLeo starting at quarterback for the Defenders. Total here is 42.5. That has come down a couple points throughout the week. Neil, are there any bets that you like here? Our expectation is mostly starters for DC. Of course, backup quarterback Mike DeLeo will be starting for them. On the St. Louis side, probably starters for like a quarter, backups for the remainder of the game. What are your thoughts on the Battlehawks being favored by 1.5 and the total at 42.5?
Oh, 42.5. Okay, so it has come down a little bit from 45.5 originally. I was going to say slam the under for me if it was 45.5. I still think I probably take the under at 42.5 just with the starters out for the offenses. We've seen the offenses typically take longer to gel, like at the start of the seasons in spring football. And while it's not the beginning of the season, it's still like you're throwing in a bunch of new players. I think it's going to take some time for these players to gel. So I still think I like the under quite a bit at 42.5. How about you?
Yeah, I actually do like the under as well here. Part of my thinking, I mean, I totally, agree with everything you said. Part of my thinking too was that, backup quarterback who hasn't gotten, probably any reps with the ones throughout the season, probably going to be a little bit slower operating the offense for DC. And we know DC loves to move with pace here. So they might be just a little bit slower getting on the ball. And that could certainly play into the under. On the injury front, Cornell Powell is out this week. He had an illness. He missed practice all week long. I'd imagine he will be back for the playoffs, though. Mike DeLeo, as I said, will start at quarterback for DC. Ta'amu, fully healthy, so nothing to worry about, but he will be totally rested here. Gary Jennings for St. Louis did not show up on the injury report, so I'm just considering him a healthy scratch for this game, but he will be inactive. Jerome Cap and Sam Wigluz, who are mostly special teams guys, will be operating as backup wide receivers this week, and I would expect a few routes for both. At least that's what I have projected in at this point. All right, Neil, most of today's show is going to be talking about motivations, how long we expect, certain starters to play and, what backups we can anticipate stepping into some notable roles. As I already said, for St. Louis, I'm loosely expecting about a quarter for Max Duggan. They did list all the normal starters as starters, and I do think Anthony Becht wants these guys to, get a little bit of reps, stay fresh, but nothing that really puts them in jeopardy. I know specifically regarding Jacob Sailors, Anthony Becht mentioned that they want Jacob Sailors to get the rushing title. They also don't want to risk his health either for the playoffs or for whatever potential NFL opportunities he gets. And I'm sure, at least with Sailors specifically, he will probably get some NFL camp opportunities here. Let's start with the quarterback situation, Neil. Max Duggan, I don't think is playable. 9,600, like I said, expecting a quarter at the absolute most, probably a half. And given some of the other quarterback options on the board, I really don't think we need to go there. Brandon Silvers will probably play between 2 and 3 quarters. And then there's also the possibility that I'm blanking on his name, the quarterback 3. I believe it's Chevy Cordero, if I have that correctly. I don't have the roster pulled up. He could also steal some reps in the fourth quarter here. So I guess we can mostly focus this conversation around Brandon Silvers. Obviously, no showdown slate, no 2-game slate here. Any interest in a Brandon Silvers who's probably going to play between 2 and 3 quarters?
Yeah, this is another one that I would love it as a late swap option. It's a little bit tougher when it's the first game.
Yeah.
But like, what do you see as the big difference between Silvers and DeLeo? Because don't we have DeLeo as there's some threat of Spencer Sanders coming in and taking some snaps? Maybe it's a larger threat for Silvers than DeLeo, and DeLeo has at least a possibility of playing the full game.
Yeah, so I feel really good about DeLeo playing at least 3 quarters.
Okay.
I think like he's in the 3 to 4 quarter range. Like I said, Silver's in the 2 to 3 quarter range. I also think DeLeo's fantasy upside is a little bit better. He can run a little bit more. He's just in a better offense for fantasy scoring. I feel like there's a decent chance, sort of. I mean, maybe they won't play it this way regardless of the score, but I could see this game just playing pretty gross, and St. Louis decides, hey, let's still run the ball 60% of the time and just get out of here.
Okay. So yeah, good breakdown there. Just wanted to, because I'm like, man, both these guys seem like they're a threat to not play the entire game. They're both 6,000, and one guy's getting 24% ownership, the other getting 0. But I do think Brandon Silver is probably worth taking a shot or 2 on out of 26 if you're maxing out the main contest, just because we don't have a lot of certainty with a lot of quarterbacks on this slate in general. He's 6,000, and he could surprise. Like Max Duggan could just play. Who knows? Maybe he doesn't even play the full first quarter. Maybe they want to get him out there a little bit, and it's largely the Silver show. And we've seen Silvers have some success in this league. So I do think that Silvers is playable, somebody that I want to have more than 0 exposure to, which not like a rain endorsement. I'm not like going on my way to slam Silvers, but at 6,000, he could easily put up 18 fantasy points and be right there with the highest scorer on the slate, just by getting a little bit of luck with like his touchdowns and stuff. So yeah, I think Silvers is not a player I'm going to play a ton of, but I'm certainly going to have more than 0%. I do think that he is worth mixing in just a little bit.
Yeah, when I was, thinking about my lineups last night, I was like, probably not going to get to Silvers, but I don't hate the angle where you play him on a team or two. The nice thing is, especially with Silvers, is that he's probably going to be mostly paired with these starting wide receivers. Again, these teams can only take. St. Louis is bringing 6 wide receivers in. A lot of teams only bring 5 wide receivers in on game day. So there's really only so much you can rest your starters, assuming you plan on playing, 3 or 4 wide receiver sets basically at all. Last week we saw Ja'Cory Pearson with a 93% route share, which is really awesome. I imagine he probably has the most robust workload here. They don't really have backups for these slot wide receivers. It's just, Pearson and Blake Jackson for the most part in this offense operating out of the slot. Hakeem Butler does get some slot reps too, but obviously he has a very unique role given his, size and everything regarding that. But yeah, I mean, I think all of Pearson, Hakeem Butler, Frank Darby, Blake Jackson are viable pairings with Brandon Silvers. They're all fairly reasonably priced, I think, relative to their upside and their current projections. So, Blake Jackson only 3,900, Darby only 4,300. There's kind of a guy you can pair with Silvers at every reasonable price range. I would prioritize Butler and Pearson the most because those are the guys that have the best upside. I will say though that out of anyone, I think Butler probably has the biggest risk of getting pulled. I'm sure the coaches regard him as their most important wide receiver. He's probably the biggest just overall weapon mismatch in their offense. What do you think here, Neil?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good breakdown. I think like in practice, I probably don't get to anybody outside of Pearson and Butler, even with the benching risk for Butler. Just because like if we're part of the appeal of Brandon Silvers is he has one of the best receiving cores in the league. Like his top 2 receivers, Pearson and Butler, I think are among the best top duos in the league. And when we haven't really seen them go off because they've been playing with Max Duggan, who just doesn't throw the ball. So now we get a quarterback who will actually throw the ball to his receivers. So it's just like we could get back to that high-powered offense that we saw early in the year with Manny Wilkins. So I don't think I get to anybody outside of Pearson and Butler. But I think like theoretically, sure, that we have 4 guys who are in play, but just in practice, I probably don't need to get to those other guys, particularly with this, like those are guys that maybe in a late swap, I would swap to some of those weirder lineups. But for the first game of the slate, it's just going to be the top 2, Butler and Pearson for me. But I think both are pretty strong plays. Pearson still just at 6,000. Butler just, I think has, we unlock bigger upside, really wide range of outcomes. As you pointed out, could be benched, but if he plays half the game, I mean, we've seen 2 touchdowns in a quarter for Hakeem Butler, at least in a half. So he can get it done. So yeah, I think Butler and Pearson, probably the only receivers that I'm going to get to with Silvers.
Yeah, I think that is probably where I will end up as well. Obviously, can't understate the big play ability of Hakeem Butler, even if he is only going to play a couple of quarters, could certainly still get you there. Let's talk backfield. Like I said, I really only expect about a quarter here for Jacob Sailors. Jarvion Howard probably handles most of the second and third quarter. And, this is pretty much exactly what we saw last week as well. Kevon Latulis will handle the fourth quarter reps. That could always change a little bit if this game ends up being super competitive. Maybe Anthony Becht, the competitor in him, gets the best of him, and he says, hey, we're going to leave in guys like Brandon Silvers, Hakeem Butler, Jarvion Howard. Let the twos really take this over because this game still matters to us and we still want to win. That is sort of our baseline here, though. Like I said, 1 quarter for Sailors, about a quarter for Latulis, 2 quarters for Howard. What do you think here, Neil? I mean, obviously, Jarvion Howard is a strong play from a points per dollar perspective. It's always hard to argue for the upside of anybody who's probably only going to look at, maybe 2 quarters of work. I'm sure he'll rotate in a little bit in the first quarter, maybe a little bit in the fourth as well. But he's obviously the guy in this backfield that I feel the most comfortable with. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just looking up. So it looks like Sailors has just a 40 rush yard lead over Jayshon Corbin. If I'm reading this right, 499 to 459. Yeah. I don't know that. So like if he just plays in 1 quarter, like it maybe depends on how well that quarter goes. Like how much does he care about that rushing lead? Because if you leave it at, you get 25 yards in that quarter, like you're pretty vulnerable to San Antonio just deciding, hey, we're going to get that rushing title for Jayshon Corbin. So it's a little bit like which I don't think I want to go to Jacob Sailors. It's just a matter of like, could Jacob Sailors eat in for more than a quarter to those other guys if they really care about the rushing lead. So I don't know. It's an interesting. It's a weird spot with the 40 rush lead. What are your thoughts there? Like,
that obviously that's something Becht mentioned post game. I can't imagine that matters quite as much to him and the coaching staff, relative to keeping Jacob Sailors healthy. I also don't believe there are any financial bonuses for being like the receiving yards leader or the rushing yards leader.
Okay.
There are, I'm fairly certain, and I should double check this, for like MVP, offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year. Sailors is in the running for offensive player of the year, but I still wouldn't even think, they probably wouldn't want to keep him in there longer than a quarter and a half. I mean, giving him the entire first half, even that feels pretty extreme. And you would think if he was still playing at the end of the first half, I should say, it's probably like a 50-50 committee with Jarvion Howard rather than the normal 80-20, right? So,
sure.
I mean, obviously pretty big range there. They might only give Sailors a drive or two. But yeah, I feel easily the best about Jarvion because, like I said, it's easy to see him rotating in when Sailors is playing. It's easy to see him rotating in when Latulis is playing, and then he probably gets a few quarters as the lead back himself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Jarvion Howard certainly the strongest there, and I do think he's a good play. This DC defense again has been vulnerable to some big runs. We didn't really see it last week at all, sadly for me, as I played a lot of those Houston guys, but prior weeks we've seen them really vulnerable to those long runs, explosive runs, and certainly Jarvion Howard capable of breaking some off. So yeah, I think Jarvion Howard pretty strong play at 5,000. I don't know if he gets more than a 50% rush share, but regardless, I think it's enough against this defense to potentially have some success, and he's pretty cheap. So I do like Jarvian Howard. Looks like he's going to have some ownership, but I think it's warranted. Like, we don't have a ton of sure things on this slate, and I guess he's not a sure thing, but I think he's pretty likely to get at least like a 50% rushing share. So yeah, I think Howard, a pretty strong play. I probably don't get to Latulis. Maybe 4,500. We have the field at 13%. I probably come in light there, but I might get to a couple of shares. I don't want to say I'm not going to play any, but I'm probably not going to play any of Jacob Sailors.
Yeah, I could see myself bringing down the Latulis ownership a little bit. I think my favorite angle with Latulis is playing him with the St. Louis defense. If this game somehow turns into a blowout and St. Louis gets up by 2 or 3 scores, I mean, Latulis could get the entire second half. I could definitely see something like that taking place. So, yeah, that's probably my favorite way to play him, but I doubt I have more than like a share or two across my 26 entries in the main contest. All right, we can move on to the DC defenders. Mike DeLeo threw for 200 yards in the second half of DC's game last week, and it was pretty interesting overall how they handled these rotations because the starting wide receivers stayed in. I mean, I know I didn't play. I had a little bit, but I barely played any Cornell Powell, and obviously he absolutely buried everybody who faded him. But same thing with Chris Rowland, and he still stayed in to the very end. He even caught that last pass on the 3-point conversion in an attempt to tie the game. I could not believe how many hospital balls DeLeo tried to throw Rowland. I mean, he got absolutely killed on one of them, and there were like 2 others where if he had put his hands on it, it would have been potential season-ending hit for Chris Rowland. Either way, though, we expect these DC starters, even at wide receiver, to play for a good chunk of this game. No Jordan Teamu. Mike DeLeo should get at least 3 quarters, maybe 4. And then Spencer Sanders, the quarterback 3. Neil, I told you this pre-show. He ran 4 routes last week at wide receiver, and they, once again, only have 5 wide receivers active. I'm not giving Spencer Sanders any receiving work, but I am giving him about a quarter of passing work. I would not be surprised if they wanted to get Spencer Sanders a few reps here near the end of the game just to get him some film. With all that out of the way, Neil, Mike DeLeo, only 6K. I mean, he looks like a fantastic play this week, given that, like I said, we're pretty much guaranteed 3 quarters here. What are your thoughts on DeLeo as a play? And how are you looking at stacking options this week?
Yeah, I like DeLeo as a play. I don't think that I do the require 2 pass catchers with him thing that I do with Jordan Teamu often, because part of the appeal of DeLeo is he doesn't need to put up 25 to 30 points to be the guy you need. He could just throw 1 touchdown and might be enough at 6,000. Because a lot of the best plays on this slate are spend ups, like the players that we are the most comfortable with, the Justin Halls, the Arlington receivers, etc., are pretty expensive. So like there is some value to these really cheap quarterbacks, I think, on this slate. So I like DeLeo quite a bit. I think if he does play 3 quarters of the game at 6,000, I think that he is a pretty good play. And if he plays the whole game, he could be a great play. We doubted him going into last week, and then he played really well. So he at least his upside. It's probably a wide range of outcomes there for DeLeo. But there's at least a possibility that he plays the entire game. He's only 6,000, allows you to pay up for some really nice receiving option on this slate. So yeah, I think DeLeo looks like a pretty great play. I think 24% ownership. I probably come in over that because I probably have a pretty limited quarterback pool here. So my guess is I come in over 24% on DeLeo.
Yeah, that's fair. I could see him getting, bid up to closer to maybe 30% in the main, maybe even 40% in like single entry, higher stake stuff. I believe it's $180 with 38 or 40 total entries. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the field went to Mike DeLeo there because, like Neil said, really allows you to pay up for these guys that we feel very, very confident in this week, and those are mostly more expensive players. When it comes to wide receivers, Chris Rowland is listed as a starter. Braylon Sanders is back from the back injury that caused him to miss week 9. He is also listed as a starter. And then Seth Williams, who joined the team only a few weeks ago, but had a pretty strong receiving workload in week 9. He's listed as a starter as well. Javon Antonio, Jaden Mickens listed as backups here. Neil, I was telling you pre-show that I'm not quite sure how they're going to handle these wide receiver rotations in DC. This is a team that runs a lot of 10 personnel sets, so they can't like outright bench Chris Rowland. I think bare minimum for Chris Rowland, maybe they give him a quarter or so as the starter, and then they relegate him to like backup slot wide receiver, which is sort of where Jaden Mickens been, and Jaden Mickens is generally around a 40 to 50% route share. So I think, kind of the lower end for a guy like Roland, 40 to 50% of routes, and he could go out there for 85 or 90% of routes. Like I said, he was out there until the very end of last week's game and was putting his body on the line, obviously, to try to catch some of those Mike DeLeo passes. I think you could reasonably play any of the 5 DC wide receivers and pair them with Mike DeLeo. My favorites, though, are pretty clearly Seth Williams, Jaden Mickens, Javon Antonio. If DC wants to rest these guys in any capacity, and by these guys, I mean Chris Rowland, Braylon Sanders, they're more normal starters, then Seth Williams, Jaden Mickens, and Javon Antonio are all going to earn close to full-time roles here. Other note with Braylon Sanders, I think he's probably the most fragile play here in terms of playing time. Like I said, coming off of a back injury, still listed as a starter, but they have plenty of confidence in Javon Antonio on the outside. And we have seen games where, a guy like Cornell Powell or a guy like Braylon Sanders actually gets out-snapped by Javon Antonio because, like I said, that's just a guy that they have a good amount of confidence in. Neil, do you have any strong preferences in terms of a pairing with DeLeo? I think I'll mostly be mixing and matching Williams, Mickens, Antonio, a little bit of Roland, a little bit of Sanders, some combination of double and single stacks, maybe a triple in there if I'm feeling a little frisky. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I was tempted to say like Braylon Sanders might be interesting because maybe after missing a week they want to get him going again. But yeah, recovering from an injury, like they probably just don't want to risk it. Like they can get him going in practice without the contact. So I think your read is exactly right. Probably those 3 are the best. We do have Williams coming in at the 0 ownership. But he's also the most expensive and the least proven of these guys. So yeah, it's probably fair. But yeah, I think mixing in a little bit of Seth Williams makes sense. Javon Antonio, probably the safest, I would think, because he has a regular role plus the upside to take on a bigger role as a backup. I'm questioning whether that makes sense. Yeah, I think it does. But I think your read is right. I think those 3 are probably the best, but maybe it makes sense to have just a little bit of exposure to a Braylon Sanders and a Chris Rowland, just because we know the upside is there. And like, who knows, like maybe they do just give them more work than we're expecting. Maybe they want to have the starters work with the backup quarterback, as you see sometimes. But yeah, I think I agree with you that I think that the 3 who are not as established are the safest and best plays here.
Yeah, and Chris Rowland also fighting for Offensive Player of the Year. So maybe that's something, DC could be considering a little bit here. I do think I'll bump Seth Williams' ownership above 0, but probably won't get him higher than, say, 5 to 7%. It's kind of an awkward price range. Yeah. Obviously, notably more expensive, $1,700 more expensive than Antonio, $1,500 more expensive than Jaden Mickens. So Williams will probably be the least popular. And I think I would slightly disagree with you saying Antonio's the safest. I think Williams has the best floor for overall playing time. Probably 70% of routes barring injury. But Antonio's right there. It's kind of just being nitpicky. Yeah. On the backfield, Neil, we saw a lot more Abram Smith in the second half last week with Mike DeLeo. Abram Smith actually led the backfield in both snap share and route share at 53% of snaps, 44% of routes. Deion Jackson still led the backfield in raw weighted opportunity, though. Not that there was much to go around. Deion Jackson was at 7.2 weighted opportunities, Abram Smith at 5.7. It was interesting because in that second half, Neil, like I said, it was primarily Abram Smith, but they did bring in Deion Jackson for some of those higher leverage plays down by the goal line at the very, very end of the game. So I don't know if Deion Jackson necessarily completely disappears here. The wild card, though, is that Darius Hagans is active. And look, I mean, all season they've hated Darius Hagans. In the games that he's active, he's playing like 1 snap on offense, 5 snaps on special teams, something like that. But, in a game like this, I could see Darius Hagans earning, maybe 20% of carries. I only have him projected for about 10% because, like I said, they hate him and they've given him absolutely nothing all year. But, I'm not sure I can confidently play anyone in this backfield, especially with Abram Smith still being relatively expensive at 6,500. If he was like 45 or 5K, it'd be maybe a Jarvion Howard type play. It just feels a little too expensive. Do you have any interest here in, an Abram Smith, a Deion Jackson, even a Darius Hagans at 4,000?
Yeah, like I'm tempted to flip your projections on Abram Smith and Deion Jackson because Mike DeLeo's starting. Like maybe they go more to the backup running back. Don't risk it with Deion Jackson. And still, it's like, do you really want to play? It doesn't matter. Like I still don't really want to play Abram Smith. But I think if I were to play anybody, it would probably be Abram Smith, just because I think he has the like highest upside of the group relative to price. But ultimately, I'm probably not playing much of anybody from this backfield. It's not a great matchup with St. Louis. It's going to be probably a three-headed committee here. I don't love it.
Yeah, and this is the second least valuable fantasy backfield in the UFL by weighted opportunity. So even if you told me one of these backs was going to earn 75% of backfield work, which would be a pretty extreme outcome given that they have 3 active, that's only worth 12 fantasy points, Neil. So it's not like we're talking anything crazy, even if someone did emerge as a bell cow, which I think is extremely, extremely unlikely in this spot. Gun to my head, I guess I'd go Abram Smith as the best play, but man, it is pretty thin here. All right, let's move on to our alone game on Saturday. Neil, we were blessed with 2 showdown slates this week on top of our 2-game Sunday only slate. So our lone game Saturday, Houston Roughnecks at the Michigan Panthers. Houston is +6. It's actually opened at +9.5. I grabbed a +8 earlier in the week and noted in Discord that I thought that was pretty egregiously mispriced, considering the Michigan Panthers will be playing their backups. Well, we'll talk about that shortly. At the very least, a backup quarterback. Total here, though, 44.5. So this is the highest total of the slate. Neil, how do you feel about Houston +6, total at 44.5?
Good question. This is a tough one. Yeah, I think it's probably fairly priced now. Like it's like Michigan should be favored. I liked the 8.5 line, but yeah, now it seems pretty fair, and we do have McClendon in there, so it's not like we're dealing with entirely with backup. So yeah, I think it's honestly pretty fairly priced right now.
Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable. I don't really hate the under here at 44.5. The Panthers have been talking about playing Rocky Lombardi a little bit in this game, and we are expecting Danny Etling to start. So that could certainly lead to some pretty gross offense, even though they have been obviously still pretty efficient moving the ball on the ground. Injuries. Houston tight end Josh Peterson has been limited all week, so keep an eye on him if you're playing the showdown slate here. On the Michigan side, Bryce Perkins remains limited. He appears, I would say, very unlikely to play at this point. Devin Ross has not practiced all week and looks fairly likely to miss this game. I'm really interested to see what Michigan does with their depth chart, Neil. We'll talk a little bit more about them here in a minute, but let's start with Houston. Jalen McClendon is once again looking like one of, if not the best quarterback play on the slate. I mean, he's one of the few guys that we can count on to actually play every snap. At least that's our assumption. CJ Johnson has coached these meaningless games before, and he generally just trots the starters out there. So I don't think we have anything to worry about. There's always the possibility of a CJ Johnson rug pull. That's something you can never rule out, no matter what week it is in spring football. And the best part about McClendon, Neil, is that he just has an auto stacking partner in Justin Hall. I mean, Justin Hall's workload over the last 2 weeks in particular, but really over the full season, has been incredible. He's already on pace. He basically need to get like 2 targets to not break the record for target share in any spring football season in modern history, which is pretty incredible. And I also tweeted this out. I thought this was a great stat. 38% target share, 15 targets per game for Justin Hall over the last 2 weeks. We're talking early season Malik Neighbors numbers or late season Drake London numbers in terms of how intense this volume is for Justin Hall. I mean, you don't really see anything like this. I finished my Justin Hall blurb with this. I've said this in the past, but I really don't think the comparison could be better. He's the Antonio Brown of spring football. I mean, he moves a little bit like Antonio Brown. He has fantastic body control. You rarely see guys who are 5'8" be this big of a target hog, but here we have it. It's spring football Antonio Brown. So Neil, what do you think of Jalen McClendon? What do you think of Justin Hall, who is going to be mega chalk this week, and any other stacking partners that you are looking at for the Houston Roughnecks?
So I might agree with you. Jalen McClendon is the best, like he's the safest quarterback play on the slate. I still think I probably end up slightly underweight. I don't know. 28% feels about right. I guess I'll be around the field. I think if anything, I end up underweight, but I could see myself getting 28%. So I guess I don't want to say I have a major stand on McClendon in particular. It's a tough matchup. So it's like, even though he is the safest in terms of workload and stuff, like he still might put up, 18 fantasy points, and there might be somebody else who you just want more due to price or just, scoring more fantasy points than him. So yeah, I think McClendon, safe play, probably better for high stakes. But I am probably going to be, cap myself around where the field is. I might come in underweight there. Justin Hall, I think, is just a fantastic play.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really tough to argue with 15 targets per game in recent weeks. That's just really valuable in PPR formats in particular. Like, how do you fade Justin Hall? Now, of course, we saw Chris Rowland, like it was the same thing a few weeks ago, and then he put up a dud in the week where it's like, okay, everybody, like 64% of the field played him. So it is still possible for these guys to fail. It is still like the games move quickly, things can get out of hand, and it just like it doesn't work out that you have that many plays. Like we saw the other week with Zaquandre White, put up 70 yards in the first half and then nothing in the second half because they just never had opportunities. They weren't able to move the ball. It's possible that happens again. So it's not a sure thing, but I think it's better than 50% chance that you're going to want Justin Hall. So I think I end up with 50% plus Justin Hall. I think I'm going to be with or overweight to the field on Justin Hall. Yeah, fantastic play there. And then as far as other pass catchers on Houston, man, it's gross. It is so tough to trust Houston and what they're doing with the way they move their receivers around. So we had 83% Kiki Chisholm route share last week, 81% Emmanuel Butler, 53% Grayson. I don't know. I think, I mean, I'm looking at the price. So Chisholm 7,200. Butler stands out to me at 5,000 because of the price tag and 8% ownership. I do think I want to go back to Butler. He's somebody that I think I'd planned to be overweight on relative to the field. Chisholm feels fine at 7,200. I don't think I'm going to be like significantly overweight to the field or anything. So I think like relative to where we have the field and the prices, it's probably going to be Justin Hall number 1 for me, and then probably Emmanuel Butler number 2, and then I'll mix in maybe close to the field on Kiki Chisholm, but not like a huge priority for me. Do you see it differently?
I'm pretty much right in line with you. I think 50%, ownership for Justin Hall is fairly reasonable. And I'd imagine that's right around where I'll set my cap, maybe like 60%. I did just want to point out, in week 7, Justin Hall scored 6.4 DraftKings points. In week 3, 7.2. In week 2, 3.5. So like there are, he could still earn 5-10 targets and still score single digit fantasy points. A lot of that volume is on screens, which gives him a great floor, obviously. But, from an upside perspective in tournaments, there are certainly reasonable ways you can get away from Justin Hall. So I don't consider him a must play, but obviously very, very strong given the recent volume. And I mean, he just makes this Houston offense better. When in doubt, give Justin Hall the ball. It seems to work pretty well. I'm right there with you, though, in terms of Emmanuel Butler versus Kiki Chisholm. I actually was way overweight on the field last week on Emmanuel Butler, which was pretty surprising. I was one of the only people who played him in the $180 contest, and I was feeling really good about that until Cornell Powell just absolutely buried me during the DC game. But I think Chisholm is probably maybe the most overrated play here. I don't love him at 12% ownership. 7,200 is also a pretty expensive price tag to pay for a guy like Kiki Chisholm, who 18.4 fantasy points last week is great. Only 4 targets though, so I don't want to chase that recent performance too much. Got a little lucky in the red zone, although we do know he's a big body target and they will throw him some end zone fades there. So if you're playing a ton of McClendon, I think you're going to want exposure to all 3 pass catchers there. And then Neil, I mean, like this is probably our final opportunity to do it. Let's pour one out for Marcus Sims. 13% of routes last week. They traded a starting tackle for this guy, Neil. After the trade, Marcus Sims was tweeting, like kind of clowning on Mike Nolan and stuff, being like, "Oh, I'm free. Like I'm finally out of there. I played through a back fracture last year, and they're telling me I'm not reliable, that I can't be out there." Like, look, man, you were getting more routes in a single game for Michigan with a back fracture than you're getting healthy over the course of like 3 weeks with the Houston Roughnecks. I mean, truly absolutely insane. Yeah. I mean, one of the more mind-boggling personnel decisions I've seen in any professional sport that I've followed in my life. I mean, just very, very strange stuff going on with Marcus Sims. Let's talk about the backfield really quick here, Neil. It was grosser than I could have ever imagined last week. Unfortunately, Lorenzo Lingard led the backfield with 69% of backfield weighted opportunity, also led the backfield with 46% of snaps. Kirk Merritt was right behind him at 38% of snaps. Kirk Merritt also led the way in routes at 53%. Zaquandre White, Neil, joining Marcus Sims. We also have to pour one out for our boy Zaquandre. 16% of snaps, 17% of routes, 9% of backfield weighted opportunity. So huge bummer for Zaquandre White. I think we're really only talking about Lingard and Kirk Merritt at this point. The Lingard usage was obviously very unexpected, very surprising. Zaquandre White had run really well, and Lingard was a guy who they, very clearly didn't want getting any like design touches, serious carries, nothing inside the 5. And then all of a sudden, multiple inside the 10 carries, 2 targets. Zaquandre had 0. I'm not exactly sure what to make of this. I still think overall the guy that I want the most exposure to is Kirk Merritt, but 5,900 Lingard is in play here. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, pour one out from me in particular. As the guy who was the Zaquandre White bull, like I think of anybody who played UFL DFS last week, I was the biggest Zaquandre White bull, and yeah, that was just wrong. You just can't trust what CJ is going to do game to game, except for Justin Hall. It's just funny. He has like this one player who like he clearly loves. They're going to get him the ball, and then everybody else just like doesn't matter what they've been doing. None of the indicators mean anything. It's just kind of random who he's going to play week to week, as far as I can tell. It's tough. It's tough to really want to play anybody from this Houston backfield. I agree with you. I think that Zaquandre White is unplayable at this point at 7,400 when he's just not getting any kind of work. Probably, I mean, yeah, Lorenzo, he's 5,900 and played pretty big role last week. So Lingard, fine. Merritt more expensive than Lingard with lesser opportunities. I don't really want to play either of them. Maybe I'll play a little bit here or there as like late swap options. But ultimately I'm not super enthusiastic about anybody from this Houston backfield. Do you think, I guess the one thing is like, is Michigan's defense going to be resting a lot of their starters? And that's one thing that's like hard to know exactly what they're going to do. And if they do, then suddenly these guys look a little bit more appealing, but I don't really know what to expect there.
Yeah, and I mean that's something like we could mention with St. Louis and DC as well, is like how many of these defensive starters come off the field. These rosters are very, very thin. So there's only so many defensive guys you can take off the field. I know Mike Nolan said that Breland Speaks will be back this week. I'd be pretty surprised if they gave, especially a guy like Breland Speaks coming off of IR, a full workload, but they probably want to give him like at least a half to get warmed up for the playoffs. So really hard to quantify what these teams are going to do defensively. And it's also hard to say, how much of a drop off it is from, like if you're a safety in the UFL, you're probably the 70th best safety in the world, 80th best safety in the world. How big of a drop off is it from you to the 93rd best safety in the world? I'm not really sure how to quantify that from like a fantasy projection standpoint. That said, this should be a little bit softer of a matchup for Houston than maybe Michigan's full season numbers would imply. I would expect they give, at least some of their better defensive players a bit of a break here. But yeah, circling back to the running backs, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to much of any of these guys, maybe a share or two of Lingard and Merritt, but man, it's really thin. Let's talk about our Michigan Panthers here, Neil. This is sort of the only wild card this week. I'm very, very curious to see what Michigan does with their depth chart. I think that might give us a little bit of insight into their plans potentially. We'll see. Like I said, Devin Ross probably misses this game, which frees up about 30% of routes and some design targets. We can start, though, with Danny Etling. He's not projecting particularly well for us, and he's not looking like he's going to pick up a ton of ownership, but I feel pretty good about at least 2 quarters for Etling, potentially 3 or 4. Like I said, Mike Nolan wants to get QB3 Rocky Lombardi involved. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. Is that just going to be a few drives at the end of the game? Is that going to be an entire half? We're not sure. I'm giving Lombardi about 25% of the passing work right now. With that in mind, Neil, what do you think of Danny Etling? Because I think especially with Devin Ross out, there's only so much they're going to be able to do with these starting wide receivers in terms of taking them off the field. Maybe Malik Turner and COC Mariner go from like 85, 90% route shares to a little closer to 70, but I really don't think they can be pulled entirely. And I'm sort of cautiously optimistic they'll get close to their normal workloads here. So what are your thoughts on Etling and then, especially those two key starting wide receivers, Mariner, Turner, who are quite expensive this week?
Yeah, and the Panthers, I mean, I don't know what their line is at now. It was 26.5. Looks like it must have come down a little bit.
I believe it's 25.5 now.
So I assume still the highest on the board. This is a Houston team that gave up 371 yards through the air last week, this defense. So yeah, it's a great spot for Danny Etling, even if he only plays 3/4 of the game. The price makes it a little bit tough at 9,700. But we have him at just 4% ownership. I imagine I'm going to have two or three shares of Danny Etling, probably, just because, like you say, like we probably get something close to a full workload for their top receivers. Yeah, so I'm not going to have a ton of. Okay, I'm refreshing. I'm not going to have a ton of Danny Etling, but I will have. I think I'll have a share or two. Wow, which might be more than what the field is at, because the wide receivers look like they're pretty strong plays. It's not my favorite play, but I think you can make a strong case just because the matchup is so good. They have the highest total on the board at 25.5. And it's like Houston is very vulnerable through the air. So yeah, I think I'll take a shot or two. How about you?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Etling over the last 2 games has been pretty solid for fantasy purposes, 20.9 DraftKings fantasy points per game. So if you just give him, like 75% of that, he could still get you there on a 16 or 17 point score, even if he only does play 3/4. So I don't think I want to fade Etling entirely here. He'll probably only make a lineup or two for me. And if I was playing 10 teams, I think I probably would look to get away from Etling because there are just a handful of better spots. I said this in my article. I think the 2 pass catchers that I actually feel the most comfortable with for Michigan are Jalen Moore and Cole Hikatini, mostly just because they're so cheap. Hikatini is only 3,100, and he sort of reemerged as the lead tight end last week. It seemed like throughout, especially the middle of the season, Gunnar Oaks was, kind of slowly building up a lead there. Last week seemed to show it's maybe more Hikatini now. That'll certainly be interesting to keep track of for the playoffs. And, again, that's probably a bit more of a showdown note than it is for main slate. But, just generally speaking, I think something like Etling plus Jalen Moore carries a lot less risk and, still decent upside relative to like an Etling Malik Turner or an Etling COC Mariner, where you could see a guy like Samson Nakua or maybe one of these other practice squad wide receivers. I believe Michigan has a player who hasn't played yet named Fazione McClurge. So I'd love to see him suit up. We'll see what this depth chart has in store for us tonight. Because I think the really key thing with this depth chart is what are they going to do with the backfield? Matt Colburn was activated off IR several weeks ago. He has not been active for a game yet, Neil. I would imagine if they keep 3 running backs active here, that Toa Taua probably doesn't get any more than a half. Right now, I just have him with his normal workload, right around 16.5. DraftKings points is his projection. But like I said, if 3 running backs are active, I will definitely be bringing down Toa Taua's projection. And I might even him out a little bit more with McCrary, even if him and McCrary are the only 2 running backs active. Last year, for what it's worth, Mike Nolan said, like, look, we don't want to make any starters inactive for a game like this because you take like a $3,000 or $4,000 pay cut when you do that, which obviously means a lot to these guys. And but he did say, hey, we might have some starters play like 30 or 40% of snaps when they normally play 70 or 80%. And again, that was his last year quote, or his quote from last year. But I do still think that could apply a little bit this year. Like I said, I think Michigan's a little too thin at wide receiver to really do anything crazy or kooky there. Running back, though, is where I would expect the most antics, if there are any. So I could certainly see them backing off of Toa Taua's workload because, I mean, he's just been amazing in the second half of the season. And maybe that means a little bit more work for Nate McCrary, who I think is an interesting kind of tournament flyer at 6K. Like I could see something where McCrary gets 90% of snaps in the second half. That wouldn't totally shock me. And then, like I said, the wild card there is Matt Colburn. Where, I think especially a guy who's coming off IR, they wanted him to get some practices under him, getting ready for the playoffs. This does really make sense as a spot to like make Colburn active, give him a few carries, get him ready to potentially be active in the playoffs. Neil, with all of that out of the way, what do you think of this backfield? Toa Taua, very, very expensive, but like I said, you can still justify a 14, 15, 16 point projection like we have right now. I think McCrary's my favorite though. Overall, we'll see what the depth chart says. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see what the depth chart says. We do have Towel getting 28% ownership for a player that we think maybe doesn't play a full workload, which is a little bit tough for me to get behind at his price tag. I imagine I'll be underweight there. I think I agree with you though. Nate McCrary, pretty interesting. Do you know what the price tag is on Colburn?
I do not. Let's see if DraftKings has him in the
Okay,
pool,
maybe they don't,
because sometimes he is not in the pool right now. So we'll see. If I had to guess, like 6K probably for Colburn.
My one concern with McCrary is like, is he too established also? Because like he has been playing the whole year. Like, do they really want to give him 90% of the work? But I think you're right. Like To'o is like clearly their best running back, probably the one that they're most concerned about saving for the playoffs. So yeah, McCrary I think is a decent play at 8% ownership, 6K. Like feels like a pretty good play to me. I do like that call, and yeah, I think you have the right read on the safest receivers for Michigan. I do think like I was debating whether I'm going to require double stacks for Danny Etling, and I think I might. Like he rushes a little bit, but he's not like a great rusher.
Yeah.
He's rushed 37 yards over the past 2 weeks, something like that. So I think I probably will require double stacks for my Danny Etling just because he is so expensive. You do need him to put up a pretty reasonable score, and he's good. It's mostly going to be through the air. So I think I probably require double stacks for Danny Etling, and it probably won't be a lot of COC Mariner and Malik Turner, but I might have like one of them in most of those lineups, and then mix in a secondary. Hicatini or Jalen Moore is probably going to be my for the 1 to 2 Danny Etling lineups I have. I think that is going to be the most common. But yeah, I think you laid it out well. Like for one-offs, I think Moore and Hicatini probably the best plays there.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Don't think I have anything else to add here. Oh, I guess my final note would be, don't be shocked if I end up pinching Toa and Nate McCrary a little bit, especially after this final depth chart comes out. Also, we'll probably bring down Tawa's ownership. If he is listed as the starter and they only have 2 running backs active, probably still going to be around 20% owned, just because he has been so consistent for fantasy. I believe the RB2 over the last 3 or so weeks here, behind only Jashawn Corbin. So there's that. All right. I think we have this game out of the way. If you want to take a flyer on a guy for Showdown, final note, Samson Nakua, I think, is going to be like the guy who earns more reps. We haven't really seen it at any point. I mean, they have wanted to, for whatever reason, avoid giving Samson Nakua more than like 20% of routes in a game. But if they were going to do anything weird with these wide receivers, Nakua's been with the team for multiple seasons now, so he should know all the wide receiver positions. He's played in the slot and outside at times. He would be the guy who could push for like 50 or 60% of routes in Showdown that probably no one's going to play.
I really like that call, almost to the point where I'm like, he's almost playable on the main slate. I think just as like a total dart throw wild card who could
he's 5,400 though. Like he's more expensive than Jalen Moore. Yeah, that's tough.
Definitely, I 100% agree that he's a great Showdown player. But it's like he's like almost good enough that I consider him on the main slate. But yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, same thing with Gunnar Oaks as a Showdown play. I don't think I can get there, at all on main. If I'm playing a tight end, it's going to be Hicatini after the way last week broke. But yeah, both those guys worth considering for Showdown. All right, let's talk about our Sunday-only slate, Neil. It is kicking off with the Arlington Renegades at the San Antonio Brahmas. Arlington favored by 5.5 points here. Total is 41.5. Neil, do you like any bets? I think 5.5 favoring Arlington, 41.5 is the total. Feels about right to me. I think this is probably the strongest line of the week.
Yeah, I can't really argue with either of these numbers. So no bets for me.
Great. Sounds good. On the injury front here, Davion Smith did not practice on Wednesday. I'd be fairly surprised if he played. He's missed the last 2 weeks. On the San Antonio side, Anthony McFarland was limited on Wednesday, while quarterback Kevin Hogan did not practice on Wednesday. Also worth noting, John Lovett activated off IR, not on the injury report. So I don't have him projected in yet, but I do think there is a pretty high likelihood that John Lovett ends up active in this game. We will talk about the implications of that here shortly. Neil, let's start with the Arlington side of this game. I mean, this is, like you said, San Antonio is kind of the Coors Field when it comes to matchups for these UFL teams. They just really boost scoring, really boost the efficiency of whatever offense they're facing. Luis Perez seems to always get better in the second half of the season, and we're seeing that again this year. He's, been playing quite well, and so have his receivers. And I think when you put all of that together, especially on a slate where there is a ton of uncertainty about quarterback playing time, we get, by far the most popular week of the season to play Luis Perez. We have him projected for 22% ownership. And I think, you could maybe even argue that I should bump that up a little bit. We also have him with one of our higher projections of the year, just a hair under 17 fantasy points. So, Neil, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think of Perez? And what do you think of the fact that not one, not two, but three of Perez's stacking partners will actually be quite popular this week in Tyler Vaughns, Sal Cannella, and Deontay Burnett?
Yeah, I really like the pass catchers in particular. Like they all seem, honestly, where there's a lot of uncertainty, they feel like some of the safer options in a great matchup where they should all get some, pretty decent volume in a great matchup. So it's really like the pass catchers. I think I end up overweight on 22% Luis Perez. Part of the reason I suspect I might come in underweight on Jalen McClendon. Luis Perez just 100 more. Feel a lot better about his pass catchers beyond his top pass catcher. I feel so like the double stacks. You just get more of your lineup filled up when it hits with Luis Perez than Jalen McClendon. So I do think I'm going to be overweight on 22% Luis Perez, and I'm just going to be mixing and matching his different pass catchers because it seems like one or two of them hit most weeks, and on a week where they have a great matchup, I think they look particularly good here. Vaughn's 40% ownership feels fine to me. Not like I don't think I come in overweight to that. I think I like Justin Hall better than Vaughn's. I think he has a higher floor there. Can't argue with it too much. Sal Cannella 26% at 7,800 is totally fine to me. Deontay Burnett, but then I also like so Deontay Burnett we have at 18%. I like that number. I think I probably come in around or overweight there. Isaiah Winstead, I think I was the only person who played Isaiah Winstead last week, and it did not go well for me at all. But I think I might get back there again this week. Still ran 79% of the routes last week. I think it was a fluke that he really didn't. I think he scored 0 fantasy points last week on 3 targets. But I think week to week, I think there's just a lot of variability in who gets the ball for Arlington. So I think I'm going to be mixing and matching all of Vaughn's, Cannella, Burnett. JP Payton only 33% route share last week. Scares me off him a little bit. He does have that big play upside, so maybe more of a late swap kind of guy. But at least the top 4 I do like.
Yeah, I definitely like that angle on Javonte Payton, making him more of a late swap option. I didn't pick up any injury stuff with him. I did, he's not on the injury report this week, and I didn't see it on film. So I'm not exactly, that might just be one of those weird fluky, just didn't happen to be out there sort of route shares. I think my favorite angle with Perez is just mixing in more Isaiah Winstead, who, is for sure going to be out there in a full-time capacity. And we've seen, 6, 7, 8 target games from a guy like Isaiah Winstead at 3% ownership on a very popular stack, I think is very reasonable. In a normal week, maybe if this was week 4, I'd probably say something like, hey, don't go crazy playing Perez, Vaughns, and Cannella all on the same team. And well, I still kind of think that. I mean, Neil, the main contest is less than 1,000 entries this week. So I think, if you rolled out 10 Perez stacks and they were all Perez, Vaughns, Cannella, not that I would do this, still fairly easy to get different elsewhere. In a tournament that's, relatively small compared to a couple months ago. So also wanted to note that on the backfield here, Day Hunter continues to dominate 77% of weighted opportunity for the second week in a row. If you just go off of weighted opportunity, Neil, Day Hunter's workload since Tony Jones started being active, and they went with that 1-2 punch, has been worth about 17 DraftKings fantasy points per game. Now he's obviously fallen under that expectation, but this is still a very, very strong workload for Day Hunter, and especially with Davion Smith looking unlikely to play, it's hard to see anything really interrupting this. My only counter argument, though, would be, maybe usage is just sort of broken in favor of Hunter because snaps have been closer to 60-40. So, Tony Jones could have some room to increase his workload. Tony Jones in their 2 games together has also gotten all 3 carries inside the 10. I don't think that's super sticky. They probably want it to be like 50-50 inside the 10. But, I think there are some reasons to be excited about Tony Jones, and obviously plenty of reasons to be excited about Day Hunter. What are your thoughts on this backfield?
Yeah, I think Tony Jones could be your Jarvion Howard call from last week. That worked out pretty damn well. It would not surprise me if Tony Jones is that guy this week. So I like that call. I think very much in play at 4,700. He has a little bit more ownership, projecting for 11%, but
Yeah.
feels pretty strong. And then Day Hunter. I mean, he's getting 45% ownership. I think that's totally reasonable. Like the Brahmas have been the worst defense in the league, particularly vulnerable against the run over the past few weeks. 132 rush yards allowed per game over that span. So yeah, I think Day Hunter can't really argue with 45%. I might include in my Luis Perez stacks, like allow for one of the stacking partners to be a running back. Probably not. I probably don't do that because I think I like the stacking options with the receivers and tight ends. Just kind of thinking out loud here about like, do I want to include that? Because I don't know how much I love the idea of playing Perez double stacks along with Day Hunter. I think I might get to some. That's also pretty expensive, so maybe I just don't get to it naturally. Maybe more with Tony Jones because you need less from him. He's cheaper. Just kind of thinking out loud about how to approach that with the optimizer. But I think I will require multiple pass catchers, not running backs with Luis Perez. But yeah, 45% feels totally fine to me for Day Hunter. I'm probably not too far off from that. Same with Tony Jones. I might come in overweight to the field, but not by much.
Yeah, that's about where I'm at too. And yeah, I mean, for a slate like this, I would generally require, 2 wide receivers / tight end with Luis Perez, and then I'll just let, some running backs slide in to those lineups. And also don't hate Perez triple stacks. I think those are, that's also fairly viable on a slate like this. Let's move on to the San Antonio side of this game. Running back is potentially gross here, but let's talk about this passing offense first, which is also very gross. I think Kellen Mond will start. If Kevin Hogan can get healthy in time, he might start. I wouldn't be like totally shocked if they said, hey, Jarrett Guarantano, here's week 10, just for fun. Probably Mond. I have Mond projected in right now with no other fantasy points going to other quarterbacks on San Antonio. When it comes to pass catchers, Neil, San Antonio very weirdly cut Justin Smith this past week, which was a very interesting maneuver, maybe injury related, but I didn't really see anything pop up with him. Jacob Harris, arguably back on the menu after his mysterious mid-season benching. We all remember where we were in week 6 when they were playing the Stallions, and Jacob Harris ran 2 routes while standing in the heat on the sideline for most of that game. But yeah, last week, Jacob Harris, 63% of routes, 4 targets. He's cheap enough now, and obviously his role is rather downfield, that I think he is justifiable for tournaments. Of course, Jontre Kirkland leading the way at 77% of routes. He was actually only at 60% of routes. I was looking at D. Anderson, who was at 70%. But Jontre Kirkland did lead the way in terms of targets, 6 targets for a 23% share. Neil, like I said in my article, really hard to get excited about any of these guys when this passing offense is averaging 141 passing yards per game. But I think if I was going to get excited about anyone, it would probably be a $4,400 Jacob Harris, who, like I said, we think, based on his performance in the first half of the season, is pretty good. He's cheap, downfield role, no ownership. You could make a similar argument for D. Anderson at 4,800. But again, all these pass catchers feel really, really thin when Kellen Mond threw for 105 yards last week. I was reviewing props, by the way. We had Kellen Mond over 115 passing yards, and I was like, okay, he gets there if he plays the full game. Like, there's just no way. And man, I mean, this guy stinks. This passing offense stinks. This is rough. What do you think of these wide receivers? Are you going to play any Kellen Mond, Neil?
I also am unexcited about Kellen Mond. No, I'm not going to play Kellen. I mean, maybe as like a late swap, then you
it would be a decent late swap
for a late swap option. But yeah, it's a tough matchup. He hasn't shown us anything. I was so excited about Kellen Mond coming into the year. Brahmas were going to be back. They were going to win the championship, and it has just not worked out at all. Yeah, I think I agree with you. Jacob Harris and D. Anderson, I think both are very strong one-off plays. I think both 12 points might be enough at their salary to get there on a weird week like this. You probably want more like 16, 17. But I think both are pretty strong plays. I was wondering where you're going when you were saying like your favorite, because I think it's kind of up in the air for me between D. Anderson and Jacob Harris. Like both look about equally strong to me. They both shown about the same amount this year. I think so. It's kind of a toss up for me, but I
Okay.
think those two are the two that I have interest in. Maybe Kirkland if you're like going for just like a complete dart throw on a, I'm down 25 and I need somebody who nobody else has. You can consider him, but not somebody I'll have any exposure to going into the slate.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, these slot wide receivers are super, super gross. Greg Ward came back last week to a 27% route share. Like I said before last week, tight ends are rotating a lot more into the slot. So the slot role on its own just doesn't have as many routes. Marquez Stevenson still led the way, though, at a 60% route share. And he did have 5 targets, but, these aren't particularly valuable targets, not very far downfield, very bad offense. So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much right there with you. I really only like Jacob Harris and D Anderson. I just want to make sure, when I'm going through my lineups before I click submit, that I don't have too much of either player because of the floor here is just so abysmal. Let's talk backfield. Neil, I think it's safe to say that if John Lovett is out, Jashaun Corbin is like the day hunter tier of awesome bell cow, fantastic play running back with, of course, the amendment that, Arlington's a tougher matchup, and San Antonio is not implied for nearly as many points as Arlington is. So Jashaun Corbin with no John Lovett, it's just day hunter in a much worse offense. That said, Neil, I think John Lovett probably plays this week. I might add him to projections tonight. I'm not sure on that. But assuming he does, this is probably a gross split where, Corbin and Lovett handle, say, 85% of backfield work, and then Aiden Robbins handles the rest. Aiden Robbins also would be a risk to steal stuff inside the 5. How do you feel about Corbin with no Lovett? And then how do you feel about Corbin with Lovett? And then I think we can move on here.
I think one more variable there is that rushing title. Like if he's within 60 yards of the rushing title,
maybe. Yeah.
Maybe we see a little bit more. Like I know maybe they don't care at all about that kind of stuff. But there's a possibility that they're like, all right, all we need is 60 yards. Let's just give him the rock until he gets that rushing title.
Yeah.
So it's possible, but like you said, I think even in a best case scenario, he is day hunter on a worse offense against a better defense. So it's not. I don't like him as much as day hunter. Of course, I've been fading him for 3 weeks, and he has absolutely destroyed me. Last week didn't really destroy me, but like he had a pretty good game at his price tag. So I think you would rather have had him. So yeah, I'm probably going to be underweight to the field again. I'm probably going to let Jashaun Corbin continue to crush me. But we'll see where the field ownership ends up at, where the projection ends up at. But yeah, as of right now, if things stand where he's at 34% projected ownership at 8,600, I probably come in a little bit underweight to that. I'm probably more like 20%.
Yeah. I think that is probably about where I would be. Obviously, like we said, compared to a guy like Day Hunter, there would be significant risk for a player like Corbin just because he's in such a bad offense. But, if no Lovett, I'd still certainly be willing to get there. If Lovett plays, I don't think I'm going to play any Corbin at the risk that he still buries me. Maybe I have like 1 or 2 shares as a bit of a hedge, but that would I'd probably bring his ownership down to like 15%. That'd probably bring his projection down to maybe closer to 9 fantasy points. He's right around 15 right now. Would you go there at all and across like 26 teams if Lovett was active?
Would I go to any Corbin if Lovett is active? Yeah, probably a little bit, just because again, I do think like there is some chance that they're like, let's get him the rushing title. Like that is something that coaches sometimes talk about. Like, oh, he was the rushing leader last year. If Wade was there, I think I would feel more strongly that Wade would want to get him that rushing title. I'm not sure about. Now I'm blanking on the coach's name. Peyton Pardee. I'm not sure that Peyton Pardee cares about it as much. So yeah, I think I might have just a little bit, but yeah, no real enthusiasm there for me this week.
Yeah, I think the best argument you could make is like San Antonio. This would be by far their greatest accomplishment. Would be getting Corbin.
It would be honestly.
So yeah, especially because he wasn't really even playing in the first.
That's the wild thing.
The season. Yeah,
part of the reason I faded him was like, oh, he was the running back 3. Like they didn't like him coming in the year, and apparently he has earned it.
Yeah, man. I can't stop thinking about what Anthony McFarland would have done with the workload Corbin
I
in the
know.
last few weeks, but might have to wait to the 2026 season to see that. All right, Neil, let's move on to our final game on Sunday. This game also has its own showdown slate, so we get to double up on this one. It's the Birmingham Stallions at the Memphis Showboats. Birmingham favored by 6.5. Total is 38.5. That line stayed pretty static all week. Neil, do you have any bets here? I feel pretty neutral about this line overall.
Yeah, I think I also feel pretty neutral about it. Maybe I would take the Birmingham side. They're favored 6.5 now.
Yeah.
That's pretty. No, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think so too. If I had to pick something for this game, I would probably take Birmingham minus 6.5. Let's talk injuries on the Birmingham side. Alex Magoo, Jordan Thomas, and Marcus Baugh were all limited on Wednesday. Ricky Person is back practicing in full on Wednesday. If he gets a full practice in today, I will add him into projections and just remove Larry Roundtree. On the Memphis side, Kwame Lassiter did not practice on Wednesday. Definitely need to keep an eye on him. Jonathan Adams, who was limited on Wednesday, but only ran 8% of routes last week due to a hamstring injury, also needs to be kept. We also need to keep monitoring him. I'm sort of thinking more questionable for Lassiter, and I'm also thinking Adams probably sits this game out. It's hard to see how you go from running like a couple routes last week, immediately pulling your hamstring and needing to sit the rest of the game, to playing the next week. Generally, that's a 2 or 3 week thing. But yeah, Lassiter, we definitely need to keep an eye on. All right, Neil, let's talk Birmingham Stallions here. This is sort of another kind of weird situation where, look, we know who Skip Holtz is. We know Skip Holtz is going to play the starters to the best of his ability, but kind of a wrench in this spot, and I highlighted this in my article, is that Holtz has said, really since like week 5, week 6, that they want to get Andrew Peasley reps. He said it last week. I think they actually asked him on the broadcast, like, oh, are you going to bring in Andrew Peasley here? And, Birmingham was, I believe, trying to mount a comeback at that point. And Holtz was just like, look, this just isn't the right time. Like, we'd love to get him reps, but Jamar Smith hasn't even been with the team that long. So we're going to stick with Jamar. I am kind of expecting to see Andrew Peasley here, especially because this should be a softer game environment. Last week against Michigan probably makes more sense to want to get Jamar Smith reps against the team he's likely going to play against in the playoffs, assuming Alex Magoo can't come back. This week against Memphis, though, they're heavier favorites. They have less to play for and less to prepare for in terms of this just being a matchup that helps them in the playoffs. So I am loosely projecting Peasley for about a quarter, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jamar Smith got the full game here. So to me, that pretty clearly makes, if we consider the top tier of quarterbacks, DeLeo, McClendon, Perez, I think Jamar Smith is arguably kind of in a tier of his own, getting anywhere from 3 to 4 quarters here. Neil, how do you feel about Jamar Smith this week?
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. So like part of the issue with Jamar Smith is it seems like they want to like build his confidence. So like he's more likely to play the full game if he's playing poorly. And if he plays well enough, then we maybe see him get pulled for Peasley. I could be totally misunderstanding the situation.
No,
But
I don't think that's a bad read. I think that's fairly reasonable to say.
So then it's like that kind of limits his upside. If it's like you're playing too well, all right, we're going to take you out of the game now. You have confidence going into the playoffs, whatever. So yeah, I think we've got him at 17% ownership. I'm not like super enthusiastic about getting. He's also the most expensive quarterback on the slate. So I think I'm probably not overweight to Jamar Smith. And in addition to that, like kind of a gross rotation in Birmingham, just like nobody playing all the snaps. You just look at the receiving, the route share for last week. I think the highest we see here is 62% for Deion Kane and Jalen Camp. It looks like everybody else is 37% to that 62% number. Is just kind of a mess. So yeah, I think ultimately I probably am underweight, honestly, to Jamar Smith, with all things considered. I think he's a fine play. I think, like you said, he's kind of in his own tier behind the top guys.
Yeah, he's fairly difficult to stack. I think my favorite angle with Jamar is I'm going to require a Memphis Showboat on every Jamar Smith lineup. I think if Memphis keeps this game relatively close, it's more likely that we get 4 quarters of Jamar Smith. And we will talk about what Memphis players we would like to use on that team here shortly. When it comes to stacking partners, I mean, it's obviously like any of Birmingham's 6 wide receivers who all play 40% of snaps could post 15 or so fantasy points, but I'll probably just be sticking with the big 3 that we've highlighted all year, Neil: Deion Kane, Davion Davis, Jay Sternberger. I think Sternberger in particular is the best value, only 4K this week, which is surprisingly low. I highlighted this in my article, but he ranks top 20 in basically every receiving stat that matters, especially if you look at the second half of the season. Also pretty solid red zone workload for Jay Sternberger. So, if I had to pick just a single stacking partner for Jamar Smith, I think Sternberger at 4K is awesome. I mean, if he catches 1 touchdown, you're there. If he catches 2 touchdowns, you probably need to have him to finish top 5 on the main slate. Do you have any significant leans here in terms of Birmingham pass catchers?
I mean, I would also say like Deion Kane has been pretty good with Jamar Smith, hasn't he? Like he's last week, did he score 2 touchdowns? So I think Deion Kane also a pretty strong stacking partner. Also a totally fine one-off at 8,900. So yeah, Kane is good. Yeah, I can't believe they dropped the price on Jay Sternberger. I think I agree with you on the top 3, but I also Jalen Camp, Cade Johnson, I think are at the very least strong late swap options. I probably go in with a little bit of Jalen Camp in my lineups. But it's, I mean, nobody had more than 5 targets last week. It's hard to be super enthusiastic about any of them, but because of the price tag, I think they're like reasonable late swap options.
Yeah. Amari Rogers too at 3,200. Famous Neil Orfield late swap back in the day. So I think all those guys are pretty reasonable options. Let's talk backfield. Neil, I assume this is going to be Ricky Person and CJ Maribel, where they roughly split this workload 50-50. If it is somehow Maribel and Roundtree, I did want to point out that Roundtree, normally we've seen Roundtree only earn about 20-25% of backfield weighted opportunity. He was at 43% last week. Only 7 total opportunities, but he did score 2 touchdowns, finished with 15.5 DraftKings points. That was pretty frustrating. I actually had I don't think I would have won the 180, but I could have finished like top 3 if Maribel ended up scoring those 2 touchdowns on a Jamar Smith, like Birmingham sort of onslaught lineup that I had. So that was a little disappointing to see Roundtree get all that action. Neil, though, assuming it's Maribel in person, do you have any interest in either player? To me, they'd probably be more late swap options this week.
I think I have maybe a little bit more interest than you do, just because the matchup is perfect. I mean, great. Memphis allowing 139 rush yards per game over the past 3 weeks. That is the best possible matchup, at least from a yards per game standpoint. They've allowed the most rush yards per game. It's one of those like rock and a hard place where it's Birmingham not really able to run the ball very well in general this year. Their offensive line just not good at run blocking, but they've still had some decent games. So yeah, if we only have 2 running backs active, then I will have some interest. It's going to be tough if all 3 are active, because it's like, who do they want to save? I think Ricky Person is probably their favorite running back, but I don't have a great read on what they want to do there. So at least if only 2 running backs are active, I'm going to have some interest in one of them. But it's kind of hard to know right now. Have to see how the depth chart shakes out.
Yeah, 3 active would be really surprising to me. And when we saw that earlier in the season, it was still pretty much all Ricky Person and CJ Maribel. They just didn't really give Roundtree much work. And like I said, like Holtz's ethos with this is we play to win the game. We play our best players. We're trying to win the game. He actually noted in his press conference last week that he thinks it's crucial to the league's survival to just put the best product out there, no matter what your playoff situation is, which I think is pretty admirable from Holtz. And obviously he's in the camp that like the best players on his team deserve to get the most film to put them in a position to play in the NFL. Yeah. So I'd be really surprised, like if all 3 were active, if we saw Roundtree earn even like 30% of backfield weighted opportunity would be a bit of a shock to me. But yeah, the depth chart will be interesting. Like I said, though, if Person gets a full practice in tonight, I'll probably add him to our projections before we even get the depth chart. I would be pretty surprised if they sat him, but I also agree with you that if they were to take it easy on anybody, it would probably be Ricky Person. All right, let's move on to the Memphis side of this game. It's a little messy. The one thing that we do know, Neil, is Dresser Wynn's going to start, and barring, true disaster on the field or injury, he will play the entire game. Before we talk potential pass catchers, do you have any interest in Dresser Wynn? I think I like him more than Kellen Mond, but it is still pretty gross here.
I don't think I get there. Yeah, just no need.
Okay. I think our boy Furby, friend of the show, who you can find in the Fantasy Points Discord, formerly of Run the Sims, I think Furby would play a little dresser win, and that gives me pause. I feel like I might
That
want
is
to
true. Maybe
I might want to
maybe I should
share
be.
two. Yeah, if dresser win scores 20 fantasy points, the top 5 will just be Furby. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I think I'll probably have a share or two of win, if only because, I mean, he's 8,900, which isn't super cheap, but his stacking partners are really, really cheap this week. Dawood Davis, 6,500, Kwame Lassiter, who, might be questionable here, 5,900, Kai Loxley, who's projecting as a really strong value for us, only 3,100. Then you have guys like Isaiah Washington, Elijah Stove, probably in more part-time roles, but they're still sub 4K. Neil, do you have any strong leans there in terms of pass catchers? To me, it's pretty clearly Loxley and Dawood Davis as the best options. I'm kind of scared off of Kwame Lassiter, given that he's dealing with some injury stuff, miss Wednesday practice. We'll see if he can turn in like a limited or a full session today. I'll probably reverse my take on that. But if he misses practice again today, I'll be, even if he can go, I'd be pretty hesitant on him. But they also don't have many bodies left. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I am on the same page as you. Dawood Davis, we really have not seen it yet, but still feels like he's a pretty good bet, at least as a late swap option. Maybe somebody to mix in a little bit. Loxley, pretty cheap. Yeah, I think I agree with your takes on the pass catchers. Probably not playing a ton of these pass catchers outside of those two, if any. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. The other thing that I wanted to note is, last week, Kwame Lassiter, I believe they wanted to give him closer to a full-time role, but, obviously he ended up getting a little beat up and has missed practice this week. Isaiah Henney, 47% of routes, all of them in the slot. This is like, if Lassiter sits, I think Henney would be the best play of the slate. I mean, right there as the best play of the slate. He would have a full-time role in the slot. This is a guy who in the 2023 USFL had a 25% target share with the Pittsburgh Maulers and was one of the USFL's leading wide receivers. I think Isaiah Henney is fantastic with the ball in his hands. For whatever reason, both last year's Houston Roughnecks coaching staff and this year's Memphis Showboats coaching staff don't feel comfortable with him in anything other than a special teams role. But he's kind of their only slot wide receiver remaining if Lassiter can't go. So honestly, that's something I should have added to my article last night. I'll probably amend it after the show. But yeah, keep that in mind that if Kwame Lassiter can't go, Isaiah Henney at 3K is an awesome play. Awesome play for Showdown. Awesome for the 2-game slate. I'd probably have 20% on the main slate, something like that. Anything to add there, Neil, before we talk about
I love that shout.
Okay, sweet. Love that. Backfield. This was a little bit grosser than I was hoping last week. Jalen Jackson led the backfield in terms of weighted opportunity, 60% of weighted opportunity, and he got all the stuff close to the goal line here. But Deneric Prince had 72% of snaps and 77% of routes. So in terms of raw playing time, and keep in mind, snaps overall are the most predictive metric for running back success. In terms of playing time, it was 70-30 in favor of Prince, closer to 80-20 in favor of Prince when it came to routes. That said, Neil, Jalen Jackson got all the touchdown equity, and he also just played a little bit better, was more efficient overall. Chris Wecht, who helps me with the projections, the UFL projections, he actually DM'd me this morning with some suggested changes, and one of them was, hey, you should lower Deneric Prince's yards per carry. He probably just sucks. So, Neil, with all that out of the way, I mean, what do you think of Deneric Prince? Because he is projecting pretty well, and he's also pretty cheap, but, it's not necessarily an ideal matchup or game environment. I'm not really sure what to make of him.
Yeah, I don't love it. I think he's 5,600, 19% projected ownership. I probably come in a little bit underweight to that. Like I don't have any great takes here. I think it's just like, yeah, I think he's playable at that price tag, but not like a huge stand for me.
Yeah,
I likely come in slightly underweight just because he hasn't shown us that much, and it's a tough matchup.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. He's a guy that I could see, maybe when you run your optimizer for the first time, he ends up in 30 or 35% of your lineups, and you need to walk him back because he is, from a projection standpoint, a pretty solid value. It's just not one that I'm really particularly excited about, and I'm with you. I don't see a lot of upside there. So I'll have some Prince, but I don't really want much. For Showdown, I think Jalen Jackson is going to end up being a pretty good play as like a flex option. Pretty strong touchdown upside there. And he does seem to be running a little bit better than Deneric Prince just overall. So I wouldn't be shocked if maybe they pinch these two in terms of raw workload, raw snaps. Anything to add there, Neil?
No, I think we are probably going to want to play the Birmingham defense against Jesserwin. I guess that's my only other note here, but no other notes on these offensive players.
Yeah, obviously Jim Turner's gotten tons of questions about the quarterback rotation, and he's just all about like, I got to do what's right for these quarterbacks. Ken Wisenhunt fucked them over so hard. Like I have to make this right and give them all a game at the end. So
show the world that Troy Williams can throw for 36 yards in a full game.
Yeah,
way to go, guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's truly incredible. I love the Jim Turner interviews because he's just so honest, and he's all about, like honor and doing what's right. And it's pretty entertaining stuff. I do have one final note on this game, and it's JJ Wilson is probably okay as like a 1K punt for the showdown. Chris Pierce, their tight end, won't be with the team this week. His dad unfortunately died an hour before kickoff last week. So that was why he missed the game last week. Also will miss this week. They're going to have a new tight end with them. I wrote his name down. I think it's Aiden Burke. I might have that first name wrong. The last name is Burke. I wouldn't expect much playing time for him. This will probably be mostly JJ Wilson. They just added this new guy. So, this isn't an offense that uses their tight end much, but if you need a 1K punt, although honestly, Isaiah Henney might be 1K and is probably a way better option if Lassiter sits. JJ Wilson, if you're really galaxy braining though, could be an interesting flex option. Alrighty, Neil, I think that does it for the Week 10 edition of the UFL Breakdown. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. This has been a fantastic regular season. We will continue into the playoffs, so we will do the semifinal 2-game slate and, of course, the championship showdown slate. Championship showdown slate, Neil, they've been running satellites for all year, so I'm hoping for a pretty good prize pool there. Should be at least 5K to first. Fingers crossed, maybe we can luck out and get a 10K to first showdown for the championship. But either way, guys, really appreciate all of you listening to us all year, interacting with us either in the comments here or on Discord or on Twitter. It's been really great. We will see you next week for the UFL Breakdown. And for this week, we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.